All right. Good evening, everybody, and welcome to our forum tonight. My name is Michael King from Leisure Networks. I'm hosting tonight's forum on behalf of Regional Sport Victoria. So this forum is going right across the state tonight, which is really exciting. We've got representation from clubs across right across the state, Sport and Rec Victoria representatives, regional sports assembly staff, and state sporting body representatives. So we go all over the state, supporting everybody from the comfort of your living room on this Thursday night. So it's going to be an engaging and informative session for everybody, and we hope that you take that on board and it can support your club through these difficult times. I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we meet, the Wathaurong people. Pay our respects to their elders past, present and emerging. And that is based here from headquarters in Geelong tonight. So once again, welcoming everybody. A bit about Regional Sport Victoria. So the people that are hosting the next three sessions, the organisations across these sessions. So Regional Sport Victoria is the peak body which supports 9 independent organisations across regional Victoria. These 9 organisations are classed as regional sports assemblies and are charged with the critical role of supporting the sport and recreation sector with their regional catchment. The RSV cluster is the only agency in Victoria that supports locally based community sport and recreation provisions on a statewide basis. This support involves the provision of training, information, advice, skill development, linkages and advocacy with and for clubs, organisations and communities. RSV and the 9 regional sports assemblies work directly with 48 local government authorities in Victoria, covers a population of over 1.45 million rural and regional Victorians, and has a network of over 8,500 community-based sport and recreation clubs. A quick shout out to all the RSV network and the regional sports assemblies who do great work, and encourage clubs on tonight's forums that if you have never heard or do not connect with your local regional sports assembly, please do so. A little bit of housekeeping for tonight. Firstly, this is the first time we've used Teams Live tonight. It's an exciting night for us, and hopefully we don't have too many problems. So please be really patient with us. We're trying our best, and we're trying to get this information to you in the best format possible. Also, our presenters who are giving up their time tonight, it's fantastic to have them. Just letting you know that a lot of us do have children in our houses. There will be plenty of noise around to engage everyone and keep everyone entertained. So let's ensure we're informed tonight, but we also got a bit of flexibility to support our presenters. Tonight's session in particular is focusing on managing finances and sponsorship with Paul Robson and Hugh Allen from Moore Stevens. So we really thank them for their time. Session 2 next week is about strategic planning. And session 3 next week as well will focus on innovative participation strategies. So if you haven't heard or booked in for those sessions as well, we ask or we encourage you to do so. The first 25 to 30 minutes of tonight's session will be our presenters giving you the information you're here to listen to and not listening to myself. 20 minutes after that for questions, which have been lodged by many of you listening tonight. If your question is not answered, we'll ensure that we respond to you via email in coming days with some follow-up resources from tonight's session. As your host, I'll keep on track of the comments that are given and relay them to the facilitators where possible. So if you have any questions throughout this session, please use your chat function to post them, and I'll do everything in my power to make sure that I get them through. Just on your chat function, with tonight's forum, you aren't able to interact visually or through the audio function. So we've got a chat function to interact with our audience. We'll be using the chat function over the course of the webinar. If you have any questions for the speakers, please raise them at any stage throughout. We will use those questions at the end of the session once the presentations are finished. If you're using a computer or laptop, the chat function is on the toolbar right in the middle of your computer. Just click on the little speech bubble there. If you're using your phone, the chat function can be accessed at the top right corner of your screen via the speech bubble. So they're just the 2 ways to do that. I encourage everyone to maybe just introduce yourself, say that you're here, let us know, because it is a really weird experience talking at your computer with no feedback at all. What I would like to do now to get into the forum, once again, welcome to everyone that's come on tonight's forum right across the state. we're in for a real treat. We've been really lucky to have Moore Stephens support our forums recently and tonight as well. And they've been a great supporter of the organisation and Regional Sports Victoria for a very long time. So I would like to introduce Paul Robson, the Business Advisory Director at Moore Stephens, and Hugh Allen, the Business Advisory Manager at Moore Stephens. So I'd like to welcome them to the stage, and you guys can take over.
Yeah, thanks, Michael. Great to be here, and thank you for inviting us along. Hopefully we can provide some handy information to help some of the people out there. Yeah, so just a little bit about Moore Stephens, I guess. We have our Melbourne-based head office, and we also have our office in Geelong, which Paul and I are based in. So we provide a range of support to a range of industries and sizes in Geelong and overseas. So including local governments, non-for-profits, and small businesses as well. So we also provide, just our annual compliance tax matters, governance, risk and advisory, bookkeeping, audit, advisory, and corporate advisory, and many other services. So it's just a little bit about us, but yeah, we'll sort of get stuck into.
I think just thanks, Hugh, for that introduction to Moore Stephens, and just by way of background too, Hugh and myself are both born and bred in regional Victoria and brought up in country Victoria. Really understand the importance that community sport and sport plays in regional communities. Also, I've sat on the board and current sitting member on the board of a state sporting organisation, and former chair, so really first-hand understand some of the challenges and opportunities also that can be presented through sport, but in this time of crisis with COVID-19, again, understand some of those challenges the challenges that sporting organisations are facing. So today we're going to try to touch on those. Got some time for questioning at the end, so we can possibly do some deep dive, but given the size and nature of the audience, various different sports and size of clubs and different associations, a lot of this we'll try to keep at a very high level, but please pass questions on to Michael if you've got a specific question. At the end we'll look to address that. So I'll hand it back over to you, Hugh.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. So tonight we'll just touch base on a few different areas. So we'll go, done the introductions, we'll discuss the cash flow paying fundamentals, ATO and government relief measures, some of the different grant funding available, and just governance issues for clubs to consider. So under the cash flow, there's been a lot that's happened in the last few months, and it's kept us all very busy, keeping on top of it. But otherwise, it's important during this time for clubs to monitor and manage their cash flow, because more than ever, this period is cash is king. So we need to be making sure that we're contacting our suppliers and creditors. You can discuss deferred payment arrangements if need be, and then also even discussing with your debtors and asking when they can pay you and work through this together. So everyone has been impacted by the current crisis, so it's being flexible with those terms and managing it as best as you can.
And just on that point, looking at cash flow, critically, we're accountants and we'll talk about cash flow all day, but critically it's for all organisations to be across their cash flows in this time of crisis. So when you're looking at the cash flows, revenue, start with your revenues. So generally most sporting clubs will have some either type of grant or funding revenue, possibly from a government body. They will have membership style of income from members and potentially sponsorship income, and they may also run some type of service or bar or sell some goods. So understanding those revenue streams and which ones are going to be impacted by COVID-19, understanding then what that impact will mean in terms of how much revenue will we have in the future, which translates to cash, and what we may need to do with our cost structures. You need to model that out and really be across that in this time of crisis.
Yeah, and other things is, considering cash flow is actually, where possible, deferring any costs or non-essential spending to a later date if required. So that would help free up the cash for other more essential items in current periods. And as Paul mentioned on, there's other options in relation to your sponsorship, but also a big income is membership fees. So it's considering what to do with those membership fees, and if you defer those rather than giving refunds, or another options are to discount them as well. But yeah, you need to do those considerations and see for the long-term longevity of the club as well, what best suits you.
Just on that membership piece, I think more broadly, understanding who the stakeholders to your club are. So obviously your members, but then you'll have spectators. You may have an employee or some employees. You will definitely have some suppliers. You've probably got some funders in terms of government. Understanding who your stakeholders are, understanding what once you've looked at your cash flow requirements, understanding then that's a communication strategy back to those stakeholders. So if we take members, for example, there will be clubs out there that may be refunding memberships. There may be clubs out there that are just deferring that membership to next year. There may be clubs that aren't doing either of those options and they've come up with a different option. It's understanding your stakeholders and how you will address and deal with their concerns. So part of this is really around crisis management or risk management, to say, what's the risks here? If we're not engaging with our members appropriately, what do our members want? What do we need to do now so in the future we will still have a core group of members?
Yep. And then during this time as well, you can also consider other revenue streams that you might not have used in the past, but could keep you going through. So they could even be considering, sale of equipment, not necessarily your own equipment, but equipment used in your sport, so you can become a supplier in that area, food and drink, and other items. So for clubs that have liquor licensing, hopefully that might relax soon. Otherwise, I've seen some liquor licensing venues being able to sell liquor for takeaway, but subject to takeaway license as well. So you can try and get a bit creative with other streams of revenue that might be able to survive.
And the other thing we've seen some clubs do is sort of, for a better word, reverse sponsorship in this time. So we know also in regional areas, a lot of small businesses are doing it very hard at this current point in time. So putting shout outs to people that have backed your club previously to really get people to go and engage with that small business, that hopefully they pay that favour back. Once we come out of COVID-19, you've really engaged with that previous sponsor, and they come in, they sponsor your club into the future, or work with your club into the future too. So look at those opportunities. Every club's going to be unique, but just really look at those opportunities, what you can do now, so that when we come out of this, your club's in a very strong position to move forward.
I guess, since the end of March, a lot has happened from the government, a lot of initiatives and relief and support that's been put out there. Some of the bigger ones we'll touch on here. So the cash flow boost, so that's based on businesses or clubs' March quarterly BAS activity statement, and it's calculated based on POG withholding for that quarter in March. That's a cash flow boost can be anywhere between a minimum of $20,000 for eligible businesses and maxes out at $100,000, and that's paid over a period of time. There's no registration requirements required for that, but it's just a matter of lodging your BAS, and even if you lodge your BAS late, you're still eligible for it, so don't freak out that you haven't got that on time. And there's other eligibility and threshold requirements to be satisfied.
But Hugh, it's probably also worth just touching that cash flow boost is only going to be applicable to clubs that actually employ people. So where you employ somebody and you have what's called PAYG withholding on their wage, effectively the government's giving you that back as a credit. So it only impacts clubs that do employ people, and you will automatically be eligible for that, just as long as you lodge your activity statement.
Yep. The next one, JobKeeper. So it's been in the media a fair bit recently. That's the $1,500 reimbursement from the government for eligible employees. So once again, you have to have employees to be eligible for that one. And you have to, part of the eligibility criteria is you have to show or meet a 30% reduction in turnover for a test period. Now, generally, that test period could be a current month or a current quarter compared to the same time last year, but there are other rules and considerations if it's a new business or you've had a restructure or things like that. So can be a bit complicated there, so I can speak to your accountant about that. But with the JobKeeper payment, the requirement is that you do need to pay your each employee that is eligible the minimum of $1,500 gross, so before tax, each fortnight. And once the business or the club is eligible and satisfies that criteria, they stay in the JobKeeper payments until the end of September when the program and the scheme finishes up. So even if income does return to normal, you don't get kicked out of the scheme. So that's a great thing there. So for this JobKeeper payment, you do need to register for it. So that's done on the ATO business portal. So if you don't have access to that, speak to your accountant and they can do it for you. Eligibility, if you apply by the 31st of May, so end of next week, you'll be able to backdate and be eligible to receive the $1,500 per fortnight per employee for April and May. However, after the 31st of May, if you enrol, you will only be eligible for that fortnight going forward. So if you are eligible and satisfy the 30% reduction, yeah, it's important that you do make sure that everything has been ticked off and completed on the business portal before the end of next week, so you can get that back pay. And the government should be paying these amounts within the first week of month end. So it is a reimbursement, so there can be cash flow issues to meet the wages in the month, and then a bit of a delay when the government will reimburse that for you the following month.
And one of those things, a couple of things on the JobKeeper that we've seen that can be challenging to clubs. The first thing is you have to pay the $1,500 to your employees. So where you have casuals or you have somebody that's earning less than $1,500 for the fortnight, you have to supplement their wage to equal the $1,500. So that's important to note, that there are some people that aren't on the $1,500 a fortnight. You need to supplement their wage up to $1,500 a fortnight. The other thing we've seen some issues regarding is the eligibility for employees, and this deals with effectively these payments will only be made on behalf of Australian residents or effectively permanent residents or somebody that's on a 444 visa from New Zealand. So any other visas or non-residents, they're not going to be eligible for JobKeeper. So you just need to bear that in mind too if you do have somebody that's a non-resident.
Yeah. And when you're looking at the 30% reduction in turnover as well, you've sort of got a few little options there of either cash or accruals. The ATO has put out guidelines that that's meant to be in line with how GST is reported. So I guess considering GST reporting, you get some businesses have tried to change the system by changing their GST reporting system. But if the ATO may question that and ask why a business has changed their GST reporting period or their cycle during this period. So you need to have a valid reason if you are considering to change, but otherwise, as I said, speak to your accountant before you do that. Another initiative for the incorporated or companies or other individuals as well that pay quarterly tax instalments or even monthly tax instalments. There is the option to vary these down for the September 2019 quarter, December 2019 quarter, and the March 2020 quarter. So
and it's probably just worth noting that most clubs will be tax exempt or not for profit. So if there is anyone that is taxable, this will be applicable to them, and same with the depreciation incentives. But I'm assuming most people we're talking to tonight are operating in a tax exempt, income tax exempt environment, so that won't necessarily be applicable to if you're in an income tax exempt environment.
Yeah, and just to be mindful for the ones that this is applicable for, if you do vary those instalments down, it's only a deferral of tax. That means come when you do lodge your tax return for the 2020 financial year, the tax bill will be higher because you haven't paid those quarterly instalments. In relation to instant asset write-off, once again, applicable if you're a taxpayer, but otherwise there are incentives to write off any assets up to $150,000 if you purchase it before 30 June 2020. And now this is only recommended if you've got the surplus cash to make those investments or are required to purchase a certain asset that you're planning on acquiring anyway. Otherwise, if you don't have the surplus cash, then we wouldn't really recommend going out to just get the benefit of an instant asset write-off, because for taxpayers, this would only be beneficial when you come to complete your 2020 tax return, which is down the track. Things you can discuss with landlords is rent waivers or deferrals for businesses or companies. There is a National Code of Conduct guidelines on how this can be conducted for businesses under $50 million. So for any clubs or organisations that have had for example, a 50% loss in turnover or income or even more, they can then request a rent waiver and deferral for that amount in proportion. So that's something to contact your landlords if need be.
Yeah, and just on that, I know some clubs may have relationships with local government in terms of rent. Most local governments will have a hardship line or hardship opportunity to talk to the local government around substituting or deferring rent. If you're not dealing with local government, you're dealing with a third-party landlord. So you are renting some premise or some space. This is a really good one. If you access JobKeeper, effectively the Code of Conduct says your landlord must give you a rent reduction and a rent deferral. So if you are in JobKeeper, they must give you that rent reduction and rent deferral. So again, it's a little complex. We suggest if you're in that space, just seek the right professional advice, and we can direct you on how you go about those negotiations. But it is a code of conduct now that has become effectively legislation in Victoria. So they must give you that rent deferral and rent reduction.
And there's plenty of other initiatives out there for taxpayers and stuff. So as I said, just contact your accountant, discuss more, even your local government, and they'll be able to inform you of what's available. Some of the grants that are available. So there's the Victorian Government Business Support Fund now, and that's the $10,000 once-off grant available, and recently the government has opened that up to more businesses than was originally planned. So there is some eligibility criteria there of turnover of over $75,000 and carrying on an actual business. So yeah, just double check the requirements and contact your accountant for more details and determine eligibility.
Yeah, and I would suggest on that one, if you're in a club and you're turning over more than $75,000, this is definitely one to have a look at. Our experience in accessing this grant for clients and small business and clubs has been quite strong, and they usually turn it around fairly quickly. So definitely one for a lot of organisations to look at.
Yep. Another one which Moore Stephens has partnered with and other businesses around Geelong region is the City of Greater Geelong Business Support. So that's a online registration to receive access to professional advice for a 1-hour seminar or whatever has been offered from those various businesses. So that includes lawyers, employment specialists, accountants, and marketing within the Geelong region. So if you are in the City of Greater Geelong and looking for that sort of support, you can go to www.geelongbusinesssupport.com.au and just do your application process in there and fill in the details. That will be reviewed, and then they'll send you a voucher code, which you can then use to select a business from the list, and they'll get in contact with you and provide you with that free support.
And just that's the Geelong specific, but what we're seeing is most local government are having something similar. They'll have different, but something similar around supporting small businesses and sporting clubs and the like. So our recommendation is to go into that local government website, have a click on their COVID-19 support link, and understand what that local government is providing, and see if there's anything in there that would be your club would be eligible for.
Yeah. So as Paul mentioned, just speak to your local government and check with your accountant as well. They'll have their finger on the pulse. And there's probably more still to come as well. Believe there's going to be a state government announcement shortly, support through Sports Victoria. So hopefully something comes out there very shortly as well. Yeah,
and we were just having a sort of behind the scenes conversation on that with the guys from Leisure Networks. There was a media announcement from the Premier on 13th of May. There's $40 million worth of state government funding put aside for sporting clubs. I think Leisure Networks are going to, there's probably, I think, some information coming out tonight or tomorrow on that. So we'll monitor that and then get that to the sporting club so you can understand exactly how you go about applying for that funding. And the other point on the list here too, just with grant funding, understanding a lot of sporting organisations may actually already have some grant funding, but that there's some certain KPIs or performance goals linked to it. And it may be that you can't deliver those KPIs and performance goals at this point. Our consideration in those circumstances has been engaged with the funder regarding what you can do. So I know certain organisations have had these grants and said, well, you've got to deliver this and you can't now because of the social distancing rules. Engage with the funder, see if they either can defer those KPIs or whether you can deliver something on a different basis through a virtual platform or a different way to engage with members. Again, just engage with that stakeholder who's provided the funding.
Yep.
Okay. Next one, just noting time, we're going to go to questioning very shortly. When we're talking about governance issues, there's probably a few housekeeping items just to consider within the clubs themselves. First thing is a lot of clubs will either have some model rules, some rules of association, or potentially a constitution if they're a company that will talk about requirements for AGM and committee meetings or board meetings. You just got to be careful. Sometimes those constitutions will not allow those meetings to happen in a virtual space. So just check your constitutions or your model rules. I think the Victorian model rules for an incorporated association allows it, but we've come across a number of clubs where their governing document does not allow them to have virtual AGMs or virtual committee meetings. So just double check that. You may just need to get the model rules or constitutions tweaked there. In this time, understanding your control structures. So we're in a time of crisis. Revenues are either not there or they're becoming more and more difficult to maintain. You can't run events. You can't run events to engage with members. You can't attract sponsorship. Understanding your core controls around your cost structures and decision making is really critical. So we've got a point in there around appropriate delegations. You've got to really give some thought to who can make critical decisions in the organisation, who can spend money, who can authorise spending money in the organisation, and reassess in this time of crisis whether those delegations are appropriate or do they need to flow back up to a committee or multiple people in the committee. Really give some thought to the decision-making structure of the organisation, which are those delegations. So we wanted to put some time aside for questioning. Last time we ran this for the Metro team, there was lots of questions regarding JobKeeper and some around the cash flow boost, some around financial reporting. So more than happy now to take some questions. I know there has been some people that have sent through some questions yesterday that we can respond to. So Michael, how would you like us to proceed here? You want me to address those ones first?
Yeah, definitely go ahead, address those first, and I've got a list here to go.
All right, so the first question we had was regarding financial reporting, and specifically where a club has a reporting year end prior to when this COVID situation arose. So take the example, a club has a calendar year end, so they need to cut off at 31 December 19, yet now they're going through a process of having financial statements prepared, possibly audited, and they need to sign off on those financial statements in this current environment. So the question was, what impact or what guidance is there regarding the after balance sheet date narration in the financial statements? So the accounting standards talk about the need to disclose subsequent events, and a subsequent event is exactly when after your balance sheet close off to when you sign your financial statements. That's a subsequent period that you need to disclose any material subsequent events. What we're seeing right across all sizes and nature of business is some disclosures regarding COVID-19. To one extent, we will see people that have considered COVID-19 in their business and said, well, we don't think it's going to have a material impact to our business because we're in a business that's sheltered from this. Some businesses actually have gone, well, there's more demand for our product, so we're actually, it's having a really positive impact on our business. Sporting clubs most likely will have some disclosures regarding this has put significant strain on cash flows, revenues, sponsorship opportunities, grant opportunities. So you need to consider what impact it is having and make sure you make that disclosure in your financial statements. We have got a long technical document that talks about all of the accounting standards that potentially are impacted by COVID-19, and I've shared that with Michael and Brooke tonight. So if you need access to that document, I'm happy to share that. It does go into a lot more detail, but the answer to this question is there's no blanket example of what that subsequent event note needs to be, but you need to assess what the impact to the organisation is and disclose that in the subsequent event note. The next question we had was, is there access to a free financial statement annual reporting template? The answer is no, we're not aware of one. And the reason why is the financial statements, effectively most clubs will either be pairing special purpose or general purpose financial statements. Special purpose financial statements mean you tailor those financial statements to your needs. So there's not like a generic template for special purpose. General purpose means you need to adopt the accounting standards. The accounting standards, if you look at, say, BHP or ANZ's financial statements, they're over 100 pages long because they're dealing with accounting standards. So there's not a generic one for sporting clubs because some sporting clubs may have different activities that require application of different accounting standards. So again, we don't have a generic set of financial statements for a sporting club. You can purchase some what's called XYZ accounts or some other model accounts, but be very cautious on taking that core templated approach. That's why there's an accounting profession and an audit profession, is because you need to tailor your financial statements to your end users. So taking a generic template has got risk. The other question we had was regarding this tension between being economically viable and also engaging with members and spectators and the like. So, we want to get people back training. We want to start running events again, but it might actually, if we can't have spectators, it might cost us money to run events, but we're thinking about the health and well-being of our players or our members. So there's this tension about getting back to normality versus the cost of doing that. We may need to buy extra PPE or extra cleaning or sanitizing products or put in different protocols which cost money to be able to run the events. This one's a really challenging one. First thing is you need to really consider what is the guidelines from government, what's base level, what you can do. So make sure you're doing something that you're not, or make sure you understand what you're not allowed to do. And then from there, what's that leadership piece on? Do we want to actually take this further and do something? But there will be a cost to doing that. Can we sustain that cost? There's no point spending money now and then having to fold the club later. So we've got to, it's all about risk management, understanding your situation and what takes precedence, economic viability or moving ahead quickly, but at an economic cost. You've just got to get the balance right, and there's not a right or wrong answer for any club. It's looking at your stakeholders and going forward from there. They're the 3 questions that came through yesterday. So, Michael, is there any other questions?
Yeah, so there is. So there's one here in particular around short-term sustainability versus long-term sustainability. And we talked about it offline around sport and associations being told that you can train. Potentially there'll be a season coming up at some point. Clubs then deciding long-term sustainability for us may be not to participate, but short-term, if the association is saying go ahead, you must play. As a result, we've got outgoings of playing coaches, paying players, that sort of thing. I guess we talked about it offline. It does come down to the finance, doesn't it? So I thought you might be able to elaborate on that.
Yeah, it's a really good question, and there's lots of tension either side around that short term. We want to get things moving again, and there's benefits to that versus that long term sustainability. I feel as being involved in a state sporting organisation, you need to understand that long term position. You have some short term pain, but for long term gain, you've got to think the long game. Don't do things now that will jeopardise the club into the future. The way you generally look to assess this is sit back and say, what are those fundamental things that will jeopardise the club? And if we move quickly and do something in the short term, does that put the club in jeopardy into the long term? And we're here to provide, if you're sitting on a committee or a board, we're here to provide that long-term longevity in the club, unless it's a strategy to do something now and not have the club there into the future. But most of the strategy is we want to build on and have a solid foundation into the future. So again, having those robust conversations that if you move something now in the short term, what's the long-term impact of that? And I'd be also always looking at that sort of long-term impact.
Yeah. Another question just around insurances. So if you've gone out, if your organisation, your club has gone out and purchased insurance for a season, and then you're actually you're not currently playing, can you get a rebate or a reduction or any options there around insurances?
Yeah, again, devil's in the detail for this one. So when you take out insurance, it's a financial product. They issue something that's called a PDS, a product disclosure statement. The devil will be in the detail of that product disclosure statement regarding if there is certain events that allow that policy to be refunded. Now, my experience is the answer is no. But then there's also the secondary piece of, can you actually just go and engage with your broker or the insurer in these unique circumstances to see if they can do something, suspend the policy until next season or do something along those lines. The key thing is understanding your PDS and then potentially engaging with your insurer.
Yeah. Another one here just around the golden word fundraising. So, clubs rely heavily on fundraising at a point in time where, competition is not taking place. Any advice or opportunities that you feel there may be around fundraising for clubs at the moment, or where they could be looking?
Yeah, so it's a really good question. I think in the I'll say regional Victoria space, sense of community there's a tight sense of community in lots of smaller regional areas. So it's understanding again, at what point can you look to fundraise and how would you fundraise in those communities? So first piece is, is there face-to-face fundraising, which has obviously some social distancing issues, or is it a fundraising campaign through other means? And what's going to be the primary driver for somebody to make a decision that they want to donate to your club? So some clubs are looking at fundraising and saying, well, potentially we'll go and ask for some, for better donations. But you need to have the story behind that. Why does somebody want to make that donation? What is the emotional connection to your club for somebody to put their hand in their pocket and make a donation? And again, it's unique because we operate across the state, various different issues in various different communities. So understanding what are those emotional drivers that make somebody want to donate to your club? What is your story? Why do you want it? What are you going to do with it?
And I guess the other one, the other question is around insurances around contracts and finance. So I know that we've previously done a session on contracts, but I guess the key point is the ball's sort of in the club's hands a little bit in this pandemic situation. And I guess any advice around, bar takings, contracts with kitchen staff, employment. I know we're talking JobKeeper and that sort of thing, but even just the alcohol line, delivery line, and contracts around that. Have you got any advice for clubs around how they can manage that most appropriately?
Yeah, that point there where we have potentially some obligations and how we manage that, I'll say, supplier relationship, whether it's employees or it's contractors or it's suppliers of goods. The first thing is there's always going to be an underlying agreement in place. So let's just take a bar with the supply line for an alcohol provider. Understanding your underlying agreement, what are the commitments in that agreement that you have? And then secondly, if you can't honour some of those commitments, so it may be that we have an obligation to pay a supplier for something, but we just no longer have the funds available because our memberships didn't come through. Engagement with that supplier. I can't stress how important it is. Identify your stakeholders, those people that have some type of interest in your organisation, and how do you communicate and engage with them? So if they are a supplier and you can't pay them now, talk to them, put a plan in place on how you'll come out the other side and actually pay that supplier. Likewise with your employees, obviously we've got JobKeeper, and that is maintaining jobs, and we're seeing that across sporting clubs, we're seeing that across business. But again, understanding if you can't provide employment to your staff, what can you do? So there's JobKeeper that says you must still employ them and you must still pay them. But if we aren't in JobKeeper space, it's considering, can we stand down people for a period of time, or can we reduce hours, or unfortunately some people have had to lose jobs. We have to make really difficult decisions to ensure we've got an economically viable club. So it's just understanding what are those scenarios, or what are those things we can do, and which one's going to have the least amount of impact, adverse impact to the club.
Got a really good question here. We might take this as the final question, and then wrap up from there. But do you have any suggestions for developing a budget forecast, noting that you've got no timeline for return to sport?
Yep. So good question, and our approach to this, and this has been an approach both to business, to sporting organisations, to not-for-profit organisations, is you need to budget. It is critical to have a budget. So what does that budget need to look like? There's two elements, or two different styles of budget here. One, what I'd call a profit and loss or cash flow budget, which is effectively cash in, cash out, really simplistic. And the second one is a budget that links your profit and loss to your cash flow, to your balance sheet. Because cash in an organisation is only a function of what's in your profit and loss and what's in your balance sheet. So that second style of template is much more complex, but gives you much more accuracy in what impacts revenue and expenses may have on your balance sheet and your cash flow. So first of all is understanding the capability of the organisation. Do you want to prepare a very simple budget in-house, or do you want a three-way model that the sporting club may be able to do, or you may need to get some professional advice? But the three-way models, my suggestion is most organisations should have a three-way model. The second thing then is, as you build that model up, you're obviously looking, let's talk a simple one, revenue and expense, or cash in, cash out. You want to start working, what's your base case? And so your base case would have been probably where you set your budget last year, or you might have set budget earlier this year and then COVID came on. That's your base case. And you look at that base case and then you say, well, of the revenue, what revenue is at risk now? Okay, we're not getting our membership income, or sponsorship dollars have dried up. But that grant funding there, we're still going to get that. So you make it clear on what revenue you will get. And then you look at your cost structure and say, oh, okay, of those costs, if we don't get those revenues, so we don't have to run these events, there's variable costs we will not incur. So you take those costs out and we're left with fixed costs. So of the fixed costs, have we got enough revenue to cover our fixed costs? You need to make that assessment. And what we're doing with business is to say, once you've gone through that, you identify your normal case, and then you identify worst case, and then there might be sort of likely case in the middle. Okay, we've got this grant funding, but we might get some sponsorship dollars in. We may get some further revenue in. And so look at your worst case, base case, worst case, and then likely case. And you need to start to monitor that against where actually you're going to sit.
I've got a couple of good ones here to keep going. We've got 10 minutes, but we will finish early. So just while we've got the momentum going, grants. So I know that there's a lot of grants around. We've talked about grants. The government have announced some big finances coming through. Just some, getting these clubs that are online tonight ahead of the game. Is there any tricks or tips that you guys would give them, supply them, that you feel would be worth them having a part of their grant process when applying for these finances going forward? So from what they've heard tonight, anything that you believe should or should not go into some sort of grant application from here moving forward?
I think with grant applications, so we've got two elements. We've got sort of the funding that government's announced to maintain employment. That's JobKeeper and the cash flow boost that we spoke about. They're very black and white application process. You don't have to apply for the cash flow boost. JobKeeper, you've got to apply, but it's very black and white on your numbers. So there's not necessary area for any further commentary in terms of why you want that grant. So then if you move to the other side and look at some of those other grants that are available, when you're applying for your grant, my thinking here, and this applies to both sporting organisations but also business, if you're going to government for a grant, you want to be able to demonstrate what that grant's going to deliver. And generally, government likes delivering some type of community benefit or jobs or infrastructure. So really understand what if somebody's providing this grant, what the benefit, and it may not be a financial return, but it may be a social return. What benefit does that grant provide to the stakeholder that's providing it? So you've got to put yourself in the shoes of the stakeholder. If you're going to, say, a not-for-profit organisation for a grant, understanding what are their values, what do they want, and put yourself in their shoes. So when you're drafting that grant agreement, explain exactly what you want to do with that grant and exactly the return, and not necessarily financial return, but the social return that that grant will provide. I would suggest be very careful with grants where you may be talking about some funding for some overhead costs. And generally, most organisations will say, well, X amount of the grant will be used to fund, or we'll recharge some of our overhead or corporate cost for some of the larger organisations. Use that grant or on charge that to that grant program. Be very careful on the dollar value or the percentage that you think you'll on charge. Generally, grant providers won't like their grant going to cover effectively overheads of an organisation. So, my rule of thumb is anything more than 20%, you'll probably get some questions.
Yeah. And finally, final question. Right here, right now, after tonight's session, what are the one or two things that everyone online should do first thing tomorrow, or the next time they meet with their committee, or when they're back at their sporting club? What are the one or two short-term, easy things that they can do?
Yep. So my thinking, sitting at a board or committee level, you got to know who your stakeholders are. Really know who your stakeholders are. So members, sponsors, government, who are your stakeholders and what do they want and how are you communicating to them? So number one, stakeholder engagement, know who they are. Number two, and we're accountants, so we'll always jump back to this piece, budgeting and cash flow. If you do not know your finances and your cost structures and who's spending money, you'll go broke.
Beautiful. Beautiful. So thank you very much, Hugh and Paul, for tonight's session. Thanks for answering all those questions. We've got lots of commentary through the chat function there, and This session is recorded and will be circulated across the state, and also will sit on our Club Help website. The presentation from tonight will also be kept and circulated around to all participants, and all the resources as well. So everything you've heard tonight, you've heard about that's been a part, it'll well and truly be circulated amongst the sessions. Just finally, from me as well here in Geelong, I'll promote our next session. So next Tuesday, the 26th, at 7 p.m, our session Planning for Community Sport, the time is now, will be led by our friends at GIP Sport. And that session will be all around short-term, medium-term, and potentially long-term sustainability, which has been covered extremely well tonight around no point investing short-term if the long-term sustainability is not going to be there. So I hope everyone at home has grabbed some great information from tonight. It's been a great Q&A. The information provided was outstanding, and once again, a huge thank you to Moore Stephens. And I would like to finish the session up right here and right now. So there, yep, session 2 next Tuesday, May 26th, and next Thursday, May 28th, club member engagement, helping your members stay connected. That's the session next week. So for anyone that isn't booked in for next week's sessions, please jump online and do that as soon as possible. Once again, our partners, Regional Sports Victoria.org.au for information across the state, and the Club Help website, clubhelp.org.au. It's 5 to 8, 4 to 8. We'll pull it up there. Thank you very much, everyone, for a great informative session, and we hope to see you next Tuesday. Thank you.